work at the moment, we work around sort of like single, well, not always. I mean, I know everyone's sort of doing more than one thing, but we tend to be pretty focused on trying to push something through because the effort is so hard to get something up or to get it greenlit. So you really have to be single-minded about a particular thing. And one of the difficulties we face as producers is knowing when to push and when to let go. You know, when's an idea exhausted? And sometimes they're not. You know, maybe you just put it in a bottom drawer and hopefully it'll come out again one day and see the light. But we never really know when that's going to happen. Whereas if you're working in the digital, you can actually put all this stuff up at the same time. You know, so you could have 5 or 6 or 7 online properties testing away, and you know, one day one of them might bite, and nothing ventured, nothing gained. They're not costing you any money to have them up there. You know, proliferating interest or not, languishing. Look, I think it's absolutely crucial. I think that the opportunities for producers to be working in what I call strategic ways, you know, using government funding, using the kinds of systems that have been established over the last 30 years or so in Australia to support mainstream production practices, are becoming increasingly more difficult just through sheer competitiveness. You know, there are more and more producers, and the pot of money doesn't get much larger. In fact, it kind of gets smaller. So to continue working in that way is probably unrealistic for the vast majority of producers. One of the big surprises we had in doing the survey is we found that there were well in excess of 4,000 to 5,000 accredited producers. Okay, these are real producers with credits in Australia. That's a lot of competition for a very, very small pot of money. So I think the reality for a lot of producers is that they're going to have to start to think about how to work outside those systems in what I would call tactical ways rather than strategic ways. And those tactical ways are now very easy for us to engage with because of the digitisation of production and delivery. I think these things are making it so much easier for us to work within, outside, occasionally crossing over the system. Again, the question of whether you promote yourself or your product through social media or even generally just through you know, websites and so on is a really, really good question, and not one that's easy to answer. Because we're in this transitionary space, it's not really clear. I often, when I talk to young filmmakers, I talk to them about why they want to make films, and a lot of them say they make films for themselves, that they're really not interested in what audiences think or feel. They're interested in making an artistic statement. And my challenge to them is, if that's the case, then what are they doing about promoting their vision or themselves? You know, if that's really what their motivation is, then that's really where they should be focused in terms of their branding. And of course, they're not doing anything around that. But if that is true, if for a lot of people that's really why they're in the game or why they're in the business, then my advice to them is you need to brand around yourself and around your ideas, and you need to gather an audience who's going to follow you from one platform to another, from one device to another, from one type of product to another. And they will be your core following, which will sustain you through those periods when you actually aren't realising your properties commercially. And that, you know, that's a very, very important factor. For other people who are in the game because of issues, so they've got something they want to say about something, then I think you might want to shift your strategy a little and focus a lot more on the ideas that you're trying to articulate or express through your documentary filmmaking. And you will gather an audience around those ideas. And that's really important for that type of filmmaking or that type of online product. So, you know, I think it differs a little depending on the type of material you're working with and where your enthusiasm is as well. So, you know, if I'm making a film about the Melbourne Shuffle, but it's part of a core of films that somehow express who I'm about, then I think I'd be branding around me, the filmmaker. But if I'm making a film about the Melbourne Shuffle because I'm really interested in dance and I want to say something about contemporary dance and the way it's not present in most contemporary filmmaking, and I want to attract a core audience of people who are really driven by dance, then I'd definitely be focusing on becoming an expert in the Melbourne Shuffle becoming a spokesperson for the Melbourne Shuffle and doing it that way. Producer would sit down and, well, it depends a little bit on the product, but let's just pretend we've got a blank sheet of paper in front of us. If I was a producer and I sat down with a blank sheet of paper in front of me, where I would start is I'd screw the paper up and put it in the bin and get a computer, and I would start doing some really refined internet-based searches on particular topics. And the example I always like to give is the one that's kind of interesting to me. I still don't understand why no one's made a film about it, which is the Melbourne Shuffle. And the Melbourne Shuffle is this international dance phenomenon that started in Melbourne, but it's spread throughout the world by international students who have come here to study and then they go back home and so on. So it's this really neat phenomenon that's both global and local, so it's got kind of good interest. So what I would do is I would sit down and use a service like Google AdWords, and I would do a search on the Melbourne Shuffle to find out whether there's any demand or interest in that particular topic. Now, I've actually already done that. Here's something I prepared earlier, and found that yes, there were a lot of searches on the Melbourne Shuffle, and very, very little fulfilment for those searches in return. So that indicates to me as a producer that there's a high level of interest and not a lot of competition in that particular idea. So what I would then do is probably set up a site, an online property, looking at the Melbourne Shuffle and start to engage that community and see whether there's enough sustained interest for that to be developed into a film, or whether in fact another kind of product is more suitable. Maybe we launch via music or how-to videos or whatever, and develop it with the community in a way into a sustainable property. I'd also probably commercialise that property so it's not just sitting there languishing on the web costing me money. So in my research phase, I'm in fact funding my research phase in a way. Then I'd sort out what that would turn into. And maybe it's a film, but maybe it's not. So the question of how you actually do this, in a very pragmatic way, there's a couple of ways to address this. Firstly, like getting online is not difficult. There's a lot of template-driven, very easy to use stuff you can harness, like WordPress, just to give an example of a basic blog software that doesn't require any skill to engage with. It's as simple as sending an email. But some of the more sophisticated research techniques can require some skill, and knowing how to do search engine optimization, I would probably just leave to experts. And you will need to engage with people who have that expertise during the course of a production. But what I want to advocate, and this gets back to an idea I mentioned earlier, which is this idea that we need to operate on a more 24/7 basis. So instead of hiring a PA in Australia who can only work in your time zone when you're awake, unless they're a vampire, and are up all night, why not consider hiring a PA in another country where they're operating in a different time zone to you? So you're actually extending the hours that you're available online to your audience. And the example I often give is the Philippines or Thailand. You need some crossover of time zones so you can actually talk to these people. Salaries are often a lot lower, so it's a much more affordable option, particularly if you're in development or pre-production and you're not yet funded. And these people can assist you in setting up web properties. They can assist you in monitoring them, in producing reports for you, and so on. So, I think it's about expanding your ideas about how we work away from this idea that everything has to be done where you are or where I am, here and now. And start thinking differently about time and space. The time and space that the digital opens up for us as documentary filmmakers and as producers is phenomenally expansive. But we're not harnessing that at all at the moment, I don't think. Very few people are. User-generated sites are crucial, I think, if you want to work tactically, because they're the sort of sites that are going to help you not just promote, but develop your ideas. So to take the Melbourne Shuffle example yet again, by the end of this we'll all be thoroughly sick of it, you may set up a site around the Melbourne Shuffle, but there are some user-generated sites around there as well, and they should be guiding you in thinking about where your audience is, what they're interested in, how you might want to push them or respond to them in some way. And they'll also help you. They will help provide you with research. They'll answer questions. If you want to say, well, who's the best Melbourne shuffler in Malaysia? That's how you're going to find out. You'll find your talent. You'll be able to kind of work out answers to problems that you may not yourself be able to answer because you're not as immersed in that particular idea as some of the users are. And they will become your core audience. So it's a good thing to get on well with them from the outset.